think we're going to have to start talking.
Okay.
Welcome to the episode.
Loud noises. Loud cars. Welcome to episode 74.
I don't know. Why? You insist on saying the episode number. Welcome to
this current episode of the Carmudgeon Show, part of the Haggerty Podcast Network.
Mm-hmm.
I am not Jason Cammisa.
And I am not Derek Tam-Scott.
But this week we are going to talk about the Ferrari F50.
Which I have not driven.
And the Ferrari 288.
Which I have driven.
And the Ferrari F40.
Which I have not driven.
And the Enzo.
Which I have only driven in modified form with a Maserati badge on it, MC12 thing.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And a variety of other Ferraris. We will discuss what our favorite two-pedal Ferrari is, and maybe our favorite fuel-injected Ferrari as well. Mm-hmm. So yes, this is going to be a discussion of Ferraris and supercars generally.
I think that's a great topic. You know what also I think you need to do? And
oh, no.
Yeah. No, hold on. I have a reward for you. If you promise to clap like a big boy, you can have lunch. Come on, clap. Hey, Derek.
Hey, yeah.
I think skipping lunch was a bit of a false economy, wasn't it?
I'm not hungry anymore.
But
I might be on my way to an outrageous sugar high.
What the audience probably doesn't know about you is that you have to feed every
4 to 6 minutes.
It's usually something like that. I love it.
Oh, and the people who are listening won't know that there's been a snack explosion on the table here.
Yeah, the great irony of this whole thing is that I have a couple of extra pounds on me, and I fight really a couple dozen extra pounds on me, and I fight really hard to keep my weight off, and it doesn't work. And you can't put weight on, and you eat like a fucking cow. Yeah, it's amazing. You are constantly snacking. So I made the mistake in between setup
we were trying to skip lunch so that we wouldn't be asleep during recording as we usually are.
I love that all I had to do was open the closet door and I'm like, hey, by the way, I organized the snacks, and then holy shit.
I may have descended on the snacks.
There's some good stuff in here.
There is. I mean, this is all the leftovers, the detritus from your video shoots when you have the crew out in the desert all day long and you need to keep everybody fed because there's no Chick-fil-A at Button Willow, for
Can we
example.
order some Chick-fil-A? Also, I have airborne immune support supplement here.
Oh, how did that function for your last shoot-induced COVID outbreak?
The funny thing is when I went through when I unpacked the camera van to get all the stuff out, I noticed there were like tissues, Dayquil, NyQuil, airborne, all kinds of other stuff.
Your crew is sick.
No, it was just me.
Oh, you were sick.
It was just me. That was that last shoot. The shoot that was 5 weeks ago that I'm still sick from.
Yes. And the video's even gone live, right?
No, that was the next one.
Oh. What is the next one?
The next one is a celebration of, I don't know if I'm supposed to know. When is this episode going to go live? Haggerty Bull Market.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we did a video with Bull Market.
Well, I mean, that's a recurring thing. I don't think there's anything amazingly
except this year we did a video blowout
component.
Especial.
Oh.
It was fun. It was fun.
Is that what they call the speciale in the Spanish market?
Special.
Especial.
Blowout special is what my local Mexican taqueria calls anything they cook.
Right.
Okay, so while we're being trashy, our subject
we're talking about Ferrari Speciale. That's a costly,
a perfect lead
automotive endeavor.
Mm-hmm. Perfect lead into.
While
we have
Ferrari
these very
Speciale.
high quality snacks here, we're going to transition to very high quality, very expensive cars.
Yes. Where to start? We have discussed before the 288. I have not.
I'm going to adjust my chair, so I apologize.
You do not wish to be too high or too low or whatever is wrong? Are you having an interference?
I'm having
interference motor with the carpet.
My timing belt is a tooth off, and I'm having interference. Yes, the casters of my chair bunched up the carpets, and then I wasn't going to be able to move. And if I flailed my hands, maybe things would happen.
You'd capsize.
I have driven a Ferrari 288 GTO, and it is the second Ferrari I've ever driven that exceeded my incredibly lofty expectations, and only the second.
That implies that most of the other Ferraris you have driven have disappointed in some respect.
I mean, it would be very difficult to be Ferrari because, yes. I mean, much like looking as svelte and handsome as I do, people have very high expectations when they, enter my boudoir. I can't even make this joke. It's absurd. Could you, seriously imagine the pressure that must be on Ferrari engineers to deliver, to make everyone happy.
To make every car a hit. To make every car just that transcendent.
And make it a hit for every single person, even though those people sometimes have competing expectations.
Yes.
My expectation for Ferrari is just, I want it to be an experience at all speeds, and I want its driving experience to match the experience that's promised by the way it looks. And I have found, as we've discussed in the past, even that last episode where you shat violently all over the wall behind you because of what the snacks you ate.
Blowout.
Over the F355. I want, these cars promise so much by the way they look, and it's just sometimes a disappointment. And that doesn't mean the car is a disappointment, or the experience is disappointing. Or that the car is
objectively bad.
Yeah, it just means that the expectations are really high. And 288 is a turbocharged, port-injected flat-plane V8. And I don't like turbocharged cars personally. And I really don't care for the way a 308 GTB drives or a 328 drives or really any of most of the V8 mid-engine Ferraris. They're not my favorites. That car was fucking spectacular. Mm-hmm. It was talkative in all the right ways. The turbo lag was fun to play with because it was such a beautiful linear build, and it made great noises. Are you just roping again?
I am, yes.
And for listeners at home, they just hear the zipper, and it's like, did he pull his,
I was hearing my hoodie rubbing up against my headphones.
Oh, okay. This is in response to that last week comment. Like, we just want to see more of that hunk Derek. So he's taking his clothes off for all of you listening on podcast suppliers. Anyway, 288 was just wonderful. And then the best part about it was, even though it was interactive and fun, I pushed it very, very quickly, meaning for a short duration of time on a really bumpy, twisty road, and it didn't fall apart. It just became even more magnificent. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah.
Yep. I generally agree. There is something magical about those cars, and the relationship with racing is pretty significant. And so we all have very high expectations. And I alluded to this last time, but with the 355, there's a tendency for people to build the car up in their own mind in a way that causes them to lose objectivity about it. And maintaining objectivity about Ferraris is generally difficult.
It is.
And it took me a while before I realized that a lot of the times I don't really like interacting with those cars, but there are definitely Ferraris that I really adore. And I had the experience of driving an F50 recently, and that... Ow.
Throwing things at him in case you don't know what that sound is, because it's just a jealous rage. Oh, hold on. He's opening his mouth. It's
right in the forehead. Okay.
We got Paolo to giggle on that one.
The very serious professional opinions, credible knowledge.
You can't tell me to be serious. You should know better than that.
I do. That was actually an invitation, which you took. The F50, I was a little bit apprehensive about getting into that car because I was fairly sure I wasn't going to like it. I don't like cars that are too large. And to me,
despite the fact that you want a 6.9 Mercedes, which is as long as...
but that's a small... what are those? Principalities. You wouldn't call it a country. Anyway.
It's the size of a principality is what you think. Right?
Yes.
So.
Bless you.
Did you hear that?
It was
That was the Mexican blowout special.
it was the water
The
pump.
glug 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 water thing that just.
This episode is really
We're cursed.
struggling. This is what happens when we're full of sugar and snacks instead of
7
lunch.
minutes
Instead of us
in.
falling asleep, we're just like, okay.
You don't like big cars, so you're apprehensive about F50.
Yeah, it's a car that I often complain about supercars because they are so capable and so fast that there's no way to properly interact with them on the road. And that was my concern with the F50, especially after reading a little bit about the car in advance, because this car is, like the McLaren F1 at the same time, was intended to bring F1 technology into road cars. And so they're like, yeah, it's got a carbon fiber tub and the engine is a stressed member, and then we hang the suspension off the transmission, and that the oil tank is actually like a structural member that goes between the transmission and the engine, and it like the oil goes inside of it. So it's a thing that looks like the outside of a transmission, but it's an oil tank. Their end of aerodynamic stuff. It's got ground effect or like venturis under the car and push rod suspension, and it's an F1 derived naturally aspirated V12 engine. You're like, oh, that's kind of interesting because we like naturally aspirated V12s. And so I was like, is this thing going to be like that 962 that was street converted that we interacted with, where it's like so uncompromising and so unsuited to road use that it's just a big foolish mess?
Right, because let's reiterate one thing. People say they want a race car for the road, but they absolutely, positively do not.
No. You drive a race car on the road and you're like, I do not. And everyone's like, no, I actually do. Go out and drive a race car on the road and then come back. I mean, it's
You won't come back.
Yes.
You'll run into
you
a
will
tree
die.
just to get out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I was worried that it would have that character, or that it would be so fast that it was, functionally useless on the road, and that it was going to be sort of intimidating. And like, it's a costly car and we're filming with it and like on a public road.
I like how many millions right now?
4.5.
That's more than costly, Derek.
Extremely costly?
No, more than that.
Asininely costly?
I think that's just holy fuck money.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Now, so it's a costly car, and I'm responsible for its safekeeping and well-being. And they're like, yeah, you can only put this many miles on it. So we're like, okay, we have to make every meter count that we cover in this thing. And so, the owner was reasonably comfortable, but not like fully comfortable. And so I'm just like, oh God, don't fuck it up. So I was like quite intimidated by the whole thing before setting off. I always have this immense sense of relief anytime I return a car after filming.
Can I get an amen? I mean, the best feeling in the world. Here it is. It's perfect.
Yes, it's exactly as it was.
Get
when
it
you
the
gave it to
fuck
me.
away from me.
Yeah, before I like trip and fall and put my head through a window or
Right,
something.
exactly.
Like,
yeah.
But driving other people's cars is definitely like a very uncomfortable, stressful experience. So I'm like having all this running through my mind, and I get in the car and I have to transit it up to the filming location, and within, I don't know, a block or two, I was like, this is going to be fine. It was shocking. I thought it was going to be this really gnarly, like uncomfortable, unpleasant experience, and that requires a lot of finesse and skill and like technique. None of that. Super easy, accessible, docile, friendly, down low. Just like
I can't
light
help
steering.
Can everyone just go back and replay the last 10 seconds? Because this is going to be this is going to be the trailer for this thing. I knew within a block it was going to be fine. It was going to be docile, down low, and do everything. I think you just described your sex life. And I want everyone to go back and listen to that. I'm sorry. It's going to require a lot of finesse, and I was very worried about it, but it turns out it was docile, down low. I should have interrupted you sooner and just put like a... It's the sugar. I'm sorry.
This episode...
Doomed
from the outset.
Genuinely interested in what you're saying. I'm sorry.
So it's a really friendly, accessible car. All of the things that you think, oh, it's going to be like a race car for the road. I think also part of it was caused by the sort of relationship or the way that the McLaren F1 is characterized. The F1 is always described as a car that is supposed to be the ultimate car for the road. It's engineered to be, big torque. 80% of the torque is available at 2,500 RPM. They designed it in a way where the car is supposed to be a friendly, usable road car. And so the assumption is that things that aren't the McLaren F1 are going to be really like race car-y.
Bastards.
Yeah, just an absolute cantankerous, wild animal. And, you know, we have to do like 3-point turns sometimes and all this stuff where you're just like, oh, I don't want to manage something like this. And the fact of the matter is that just maneuvering the car around, it's an incredibly friendly, like accessible car. The shift effort of that car is lighter than any other manual Ferrari I've driven, any other transaxle Ferrari, lighter than 355, lighter than a 550, lighter than a 308. I mean,
you don't look at an F50 and think this is going to be a light,
delicate
sweetheart,
driving
delicate
experience.
sweetheart, right?
Yeah, and it really is like that. The car shrinks around you. The steering is manual and light, and fingertip drive with your fingertips. The engine's really tractable. I was really surprised by that character of the car, especially because you go back and have you ever watched any of the old reviews video? Like Clarkson hated the car. He
Really?
shat on it at length, violently.
Explosively.
Mexican blowout. He said that because the engine is a stressed member and it's a carbon tub, that the engine feels like it's bolted to your spine, which, you know.
Which wouldn't you want on a V12?
Yeah. I mean, and it's not offensive. It's not problematic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you feel it and you know it's there and you hear it. And I enjoyed that characteristic. But, you know, to present that as a bad thing, because that was one of the frequent questions. I did one of those things where I said, what do you want to know about the F50? And everyone's just like, is it really bolted to your spine and is that bad? No, it's not bad. It was actually really.
I mean, does the whole car really buzz? Is it?
No.
Oh,
well, no. You like feel it vibrating, but it's not like
you
making.
Want to feel it.
Yeah, but it's not like making like your vision doesn't do the thing where you know it starts to, you know, and you don't get interior resonances of pieces of various parts of the rearview mirror or stalks or whatever.
I mean, listen, you put an insert in the engine mounts on your GTI to make you feel vibration. So maybe you're not the right person because you're clearly not a Lexus buyer. And that's Clarkson so rarely got it really wrong. I feel like, how could you have a car like that looks like an F50 and want it to be civilized?
I don't know. Yeah, that's why I was surprised by that sort of reaction to the car. So it's an interesting dichotomy because the car is friendly enough that it's not intimidating, but then when you start asking a lot of it, then it gets quite exciting and it's engaging and it's fun. So it's kind of what you want from a supercar. To me, it's what a supercar should be, because normally...
Yeah, we're going to ignore that.
Normally with a supercar, like especially modern ones, it is so outrageously fast and performant that you're just like, this... I don't want to engage with this. I can't engage with it, actually. It's the real issue.
That is, we have definitely gotten to a point where Ferraris are too fast. Once we went turbo. Once
Ferrari went turbo.
Right.
Like the 488.
488, and then Pista was the step over the line for me. So I don't.
How I abstract this is the ability to use full throttle. Right? How much time can you spend at full throttle in a car?
Okay, all modern cars are too fast in that regard, right? I mean, 2-3 seconds and it's over. Which
but
again
in an
describes your sex
car,
life. Come on.
In a naturally aspirated car, if you mat it at 1500 RPM, there's going to be a while where nothing happens because you have to wait. If it's a peaky motor like a 458 Speciale motor, you have to wait for that there's a progression, a build of torque instead of just getting a big wallop of it.
On turbos too. I mean, you get those.
Yeah, but then as soon as you hit boost, it's just like
too much.
Unmanageable.
We should get to talking about modern Ferraris versus this in a minute, but let's go back a step. So you've driven F40 extensively. Not
extensively, but enough to have an impression of it.
Okay, I haven't driven either one of those. So let's compare and contrast for a second. So F40 was, of course, a turbocharged V8, mechanically identical, I think, to 288 GTO.
Not identical, but it's fundamentally very similar.
Same stuff.
A little more power.
And F50 is an NA V12.
It's an NA V12. It's 4.8 liters or
That's
something
all
like
it is?
Yeah. Well, it's based on a 3-liter F1 block. So in that sense, it's like a 50% increase in displacement.
So it shares nothing with the regular V12s that were in production at the time?
No, because the only V12 in production at the time would have been the 456.
Right.
It's not a timing chain motor, or it's not a timing belt motor. It is not a timing belt motor.
It is a chain. So forgive me. I was never one of these kids that had F50s on posters on my wall. I had sedans and whatever. And I came into this specifically not doing any research on this because I want you to educate me like you're educating everyone else. Although everyone else who's listening to this probably knows more about F50s than I do. So it is actually different. How high does it rev?
85.
Yeah, that's pretty spicy for the time.
Which is incidentally also where the power peak is.
Oh, that's fabulous.
And the torque peak is 65.
Wow. Okay, so in engineering terms, when you look at the spread between those two numbers, 6,500 and 8,500 RPM, the bigger the spread of between those two peaks, typically the more tractable an engine is, and the more torquey it is down low. To have just a 2,000 RPM spread, you're talking about VTEC Hondas.
Yes.
Like
it's very high specific output usually.
So there's nobody home down low.
Yeah. And normally people present nobody home down low as a problem, but I actually really liked it about this car because you could drive around in sort of normal situations, spending a lot of time at full throttle, which is a weird thing to say about a carbon fiber chassis car with a naturally aspirated, with wings all over it, and it's made of carbon fiber and Kevlar and all this stuff. And that's the difference that I think that I really want to highlight compared it against modern Ferraris is that you can spend a ton of time at full throttle in this car because the torque peak is so high. And people are like, well, it's dead down low. It's like, I don't know. I like driving around at full throttle and listening to the engine and feeling it, on road use, right? Because that's fundamentally the issue with supercars is that for road use, they're no fun because you don't get to engage with the car.
Right. We've gotten, it's if you look at sort of average traffic speeds over time, I think we're now on the down slope. Traffic's getting slower because there's more people on the road. Yeah. Speed limits are not going up and up and up and up. And it used to be that from the 1930s to the 50s to the 70s, you would see an increase in road speed, both in sustained cars. Like 50s cars can't do 80, 90 miles an hour on extended base.
No.
Most of them can't manage anything more than 50 or 60 comfortably. Yeah. And so traffic has gotten quicker and quicker and is now kind of slowing down. But for a while there, traffic speeds and cars' capabilities were in lockstep, right? The traffic speeds
increasing
were
in parallel, yeah.
Right, and the traffic speeds were limited by what the cars can do. Now it's so artificially limited, even for the slowest cars.
Yeah, compared to the capability of the car.
Right, so these cars are bored out of their mind. I was having a conversation yesterday with somebody who said, well, I just don't like this engine because you've got to really work for the revs. Well, you're in a sports car. I think you should have to work for your revs. I mean, there's something nice.
That's what's fun.
Right.
I mean, it depends. That's why people have different cars at different times, right? Sometimes.
Sorry, I'm putting my phone on Do Not Disturb because now it's pissing me off.
We'll wait.
I apologize. No, you don't have to wait.
No,
I can tap on my
I did that
thing.
for comedic effect.
Oh, sorry, everyone. That was rude of me.
What were we talking about?
My phone, I'm being not on Do Not Disturb because I have someone picking up a laptop. Yes, you were talking about torque. I want in a street, in an everyday car.
Different experiences at different times. At certain times, there's something really great. No replacement for displacement. There's something really magical about driving a 427 Ford because it's just you feel like you're going to tear the pavement with the car. Right. And that's really a neat experience. But then other times for sports cars where there's sort of the ethos is light and nimble and interact with the car and rev it up to red line, all that stuff, you do want that that progression. That's what I really liked about the engine of the F50 is that you get a progression as you go through the revs. And the torque kind of does pile on relatively quickly at high RPM. And so there's a nearly turbocharged feel to that, but it is still responsive like a naturally aspirated engine. And so you get this journey. The car takes you on the journey. It's very dramatic.
In each gear.
Yes.
Right? That's great. The gearing's too tall for your liking. But interestingly, the top speed is gearing limited. And they were quick. They were 200?
195.
Right.
And so the top speed is slower than F40. And that was part of the reason why when they were new, none of the magazines would let anybody test those cars. Because they're like, it's slower than the F40.
You mean Ferrari wouldn't let the magazines test
Correct,
cars?
Yes.
It's 5-speed.
6.
Right? So it's 6. Yeah, you're dividing 200 and something miles an hour by 6 gears. You're not going to have short.
Long gearing. But you can rev it out to red line and it's a fun experience and you can do it on the street, consistently.
How does it sound?
Outside the car, it doesn't sound like much.
Really?
Yeah.
We should do an episode.
It's good, but it's quiet.
I would love to do an objective test on this because cars, I think, are now louder than they've ever been. Yeah. I don't think...
It's pretty quiet outside the car.
Yeah, all of 80s and 90s, really loud cars that we think of loud and screaming, all the supercars, are quieter than friggin' Lexus GSs at this point.
Yes, with a big loud and cold start thing going on. Yeah. That's true. Inside the car, though, you get a ton of noise because the engine is attached to the firewall, so you really hear and feel the engine. Inside, it's a wonderful experience.
Do you hear a lot of induction noise, too?
Yeah.
You have a video coming out on this car that you
Yes.
can plug? Is that why you wanted to do this episode?
I mean,
Self-serving.
we're mostly trying to sell the car, so That's the purpose of
Do you
the
really
video.
think any of the people who listen to the show can buy a F50?
Well, no, we're just using this as an excuse to talk about the car.
good.
I don't think that the Carmudgeon show is going to sell an F50.
Yeah,
but
never know.
I would love to be proven.
That would be wonderful, and I want a commission.
Yeah.
Or at
Fair.
least, you can buy me some
Those are my
Welch's
favorite.
fruit snack. Here, have that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So there's a progression. There's a journey in. This is too.
I would like to
easy.
point out that he made it 22 minutes without eating. Come on, open it.
No,
fine.
it's too loud. There's too
Well, you
much
can just
ambient noise.
rip off the Band-Aid slowly. Just open the whole thing, or rip off the Band-Aid quickly, and then dump them all out.
Too
on
bad
your
at this.
laptop.
This is a corollary skill to clapping.
Clapping. Yeah.
And so
Opening.
I'm bad at it.
Just
I'm
dump it
gonna
out.
Put it out here.
And now we're gonna listen to him go.
I know.
On what these are. Yeah.
Okay.
I think you should. This is the theme of the episode: is Derek eating while talking about F50s.
No. Okay. So, the engine, there's a progression. It takes you on a journey. And to me, that is an important part of a really timeless, excellent sports car experience. And some people just want to be assaulted by torque immediately. And, for them, this is not the car. But the character is fundamentally old school sports car, but none of the cantankerousness of a Countach or a Miura or a Boxer.
Is that just due to that cantankerousness you're talking about? Is that due to carbs? Because carburetors are they're deeply flawed devices that don't work.
No, I'm talking about shift effort and finesse and technique needed. There is some of it is related to carbs. Some of it is control forces. Control forces in the F50 are light.
Mm-hmm.
They're lighter than a 355 in probably every respect.
The last thing you'd ever expect.
Except for steering, because it's not assisted. But it's not heavy. It's just not as light as the 350. The 355 steering is too light.
One of the things that bothers me about the C8 Corvette is that all the control weights are light. I sort of think, oh my God, we can't hear you.
Okay, I'm not going to eat anymore.
One of the things I loved about Corvette C6, C5, C4, C7 is that all the control weights are really heavy. And there's a labored feeling to the entire car, right?
Yeah,
you
have
hit
to
the
work.
canker hit the starter
And it cranks.
and cranks in a C7, and it can barely turn the engine over when it's hot. You know this. We all Corvettes. And then you get in it, and there's a misfire at idle and all those small blocks, and so the whole thing just feels labored. And then the shifter effort's high and the steering effort's high. Ferraris are
Heavy clutch.
always light, way lighter than we think they're going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And the C8 Corvette went to a Ferrari emulation. The steering's light. Even the shift paddles themselves have light
forces,
action.
yeah.
The pedals are light. Everything about the car is light, and it rides like it's massless. So it's one of the defining characteristics of Ferrari, but I think that's one of the things that surprises people when they get in Ferraris, because we assume they're going to be
Except
like
vintage
Lamborghinis.
shifters.
Yeah.
The vintage shifters are pretty high effort, especially when they're cold.
Yeah. But that's just shit design. Bad transmission and synchro design must be. But so it's always staggering to me when you get an old Ferrari and everything is so light. Last week I mentioned 330 GTS that I drove.
Mm-hmm.
You corrected me. It's 1967 Geneva Auto Show, 66,
66.
whatever it was. Late 60s V12 coupe, and everything convertible, the one I drove. Everything was incredibly light, Honda-like, where the clutch just falls down to the floor with you.
Mm-hmm. It depends what car. I mean, Testarossas have fairly heavy clutches.
Sure, that's true.
And the shift effort on most of the dogleg cars is fairly high, especially when cold.
Yeah.
But yes.
But most of the control weighting.
Night and day difference between that and a Countach, for
or
example.
Miura, right?
Yeah.
Except
the steering. Miura steering is light, but the
once
shifter,
you're moving, yeah.
Yeah.
But the shifter and the clutch and the brakes and everything else are heavy and gruff. Okay, so you've not driven a 288.
I have not.
That's annoying. We need you to get we need to get me into an F40 and an F50. Definitely don't have ulterior motives there. And you into a 288, so we can talk about all this whole lineage. But was F50 even quicker in acceleration than F40 was?
It's 3.8 or so.
God, that's fast. First gear happens all in first gear.
No. You know what? I did these calculations manually because I couldn't find a period like anything from Ferrari, and so it was right at 60. So I don't, because you have to enter the size of the tire, and you're like, oh, how precise is this? So I actually don't know whether the car needs a gear shift
Before 60. For 3.8, I bet it does. I bet it does not. I bet it can hit 60 in first. But that's fucking fast.
Yeah, but it's really it all happens at the top end. So the net result of all of this was that the experience of the car really exceeded my expectations. I think it has now become my favorite fuel-injected Ferrari to drive.
Really?
I think so. I mean, what is your favorite fuel-injected? The 288.
Okay, now we can talk about modern Ferraris. So the mid-engine V8 lineage of Ferraris is my least favorite sort of layout. I guess I don't really love the Boxer 12s either. I don't love the Testarossas. They're so cool to look at, and I would own one.
Did you ever drive a Boxer?
Yes.
A 512?
Wasn't 365 that we
that's
both
right.
driven?
Yeah.
I love that. That was a hell of an experience. But the Testarossa just became a living room.
Yes. 180 mile an hour sofa. That's always what we would call them.
That's what the head of PR called it. It was a 300 kilometer an hour living room. Is what he, and that's not what you expect when you see the strakes and all the rest of the stuff. There's a definite expectation versus reality difference when it comes to a lot of classic Ferraris. And most of the V8s,
Boxer is closer to what you want.
The Boxer is what I want, and that got the bad reviews. This is where
it's too uncivilized, it's too much work, it's too hot.
This is where one of those questions from the Q&A that was so perfectly on point is, what do we disagree with versus other journalists? And I'm a journalist. That's what I do. But I'm also a car collector and an old car fan and a shitbox collector, I guess is more like it. But as someone who owns multiple cars and has owned multiple cars for 22 years, it's been 22 years since I've had only one car. I'm seeking different experiences, and out of a sports car or something that looks like that, I don't want it to be a good car. And you've made fun of me about this, saying I like cars that are unhinged. It's not even that. It's that I like cars that are just very different from what I would value on a daily driver. And so a 365 Boxer is, I don't want to say it's a pain in the ass, but it's
a little bit demanding. Yeah, and it's very assaults you a little bit with the senses, or your senses are very overwhelmed
activated,
by inputs. Yeah.
It's an experience.
It's incredibly. I overuse this word, but it's very visceral.
It is.
Right? It asks a fair bit from you, and it gives you a lot in return, and it's an intense experience, and it's not the kind of thing you drive around with a coffee in one hand and operate.
No, but I think that there's an exchange, right? It asks a lot of you. You got to pay attention. You have to be on your A game. You have to be driving it. And in return, it gives you what you ask of it. So there's an even exchange there. There's some cars that's not an even exchange. And I think Countach in some ways, even though I quite like it, it asks a lot of you and then kind of fights you, afterwards. You don't get what you asked for to begin with. A 512, or I shouldn't say, a Testarossa asks nothing of you, and then also gives you nothing back. It's just less of an exchange.
It's like being in a 7 Series,
right? And they fixed that with 512 TR.
I should say S Class.
It's more sporty than an S
No,
Class.
of course it is.
Yeah. But there's just not that much going on. And you don't hear much, you don't feel much. It's just
But it's easy, it's accessible, it's friendly. It's the kind of car that sells in 7,000 units
right.
Which is exactly what they did.
But you look at it, and I'm sorry, I don't want a cushy luxury car experience from a car that looks like that. I just don't.
Yep.
And I feel like a lot of the modern V12 front engine Ferraris have really delivered on the screaming insanity experience that I want and expect, more so than the V8s. So 599, so I think the earliest sort of modern V12 car that nailed it, because the 456, all of those cars, the 575,
550,
550, they're not. God, we're gonna get so much trouble here. Let me ask you.
I've said this before.
Okay.
I will gladly
say it again.
I will gladly repeat it. Those cars do not deliver a Ferrari experience, in my opinion.
No.
And
it's closer to a Lexus experience than it is a Ferrari.
It's experience. Like a go to Monaco for lunch kind of car. It's comfortable to cover distance.
That sounds tremendously fabulous. Let's go to Monaco for lunch, and that's I think why our expectations are of what a Ferrari.
I don't like
delivery
Monaco
is.
that much.
Me neither. But a 550 makes a nice daily driver.
Yeah,
really nice daily. It's not.
But
exciting.
As long as you're covering long distances at high speeds. It's a long distance at high speed.
Even in town, it's easy.
Yeah.
It's got light steering, and the engine sounds like absolutely nothing. They're quiet.
Yeah.
They're comfortable. They're not, it's not like getting in and out of a 7 Series, but it's easy to deal with. You can see out of it. At 599 started out okay and became great with HGTE, which is their finally packaged, and then became holy shit with GTO. Okay, that's its own thing. F12 picked up where GTO left off. And I think F12 is one of those cars, and now A12 Superfast. you get in that car and the whole experience is just perfect.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It all shuts
It's a
up.
little bit terrifying.
It's a little bit terrifying, but when you put it in top gear and you're cruising around, it's perfectly comfortable.
Yes,
it's perfectly
it's true.
tractable, but it will turn. It's all down to the engine, right?
Yes.
It's got great steering. F12 has great steering. A12 when electric, far less great. But overall, the whole thing can be exciting. They can barely put their power to the ground,
They're very poor at that.
which is someone like,
wildly entertaining.
right. Randy Pope was, really a professional race car driver. He's like, there's no reason this car should have this problem putting its power down. I put my hand up. I object. What's more fun than lighting them the fuck up? You're doing 10 miles an hour. The Prius downshifts next to you. You hear, and you just explode 10 degrees sideways. And the noise they make, it's just theater.
Yeah. I mean, it's my favorite two-pedal Ferrari is probably an F12.
Oh yeah, mine too, without question. A12 is the engine took a step up in power and sound, but the chassis, the steering took a big step down.
And I mean, do you really need more power than
No.
the F12 has? I mean, it's in 740 horsepower.
I also don't need an F12
700.
with a bunch of what looks like Mansory accessories on
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
slits, slashes.
Yeah, there's a really clean, elegant spareness to the looks of the F12 that I think makes it the best looking Ferrari of the last, 20 years.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there's some pretty cool stuff coming out at the moment. I'd say 296 is pretty great looking. Even Roma is great looking. Roma doesn't light your hair on fire. That's not its mission.
No, it's like an alternative to an SL.
Yeah, it's exactly what it's like. But I think Ferrari has now really nailed the V12 thing sort of at the end, in that it gives you the experience that the looks promise, but then also the GT.
Well, and there are only two naturally aspirated V12s in existence anymore.
Hold on, let me think about this. Is Pagani still using the Mercedes 3-valve per cylinder turbo V6?
I think so.
That's that.
V12.
BMW is V12. BMW still has a V12.
Well, but is it I'm saying naturally
Oh
aspirated.
no, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a Aventador, and oh god, Toyota still make a V12 Crown?
I don't know.
I don't know this stuff. Yeah, no, V12s are. I want a V12. Just to say, I've had a V12, but the thing is, I want a V12 that sounds like the V12.
Yeah. You don't want an XJ12.
Oh god, no one wants that.
I've definitely never owned one.
Let's take two unreliable 6-cylinders that make no power for their displacement, put them together,
They're
and have
not
them
the
make
same.
less power.
They're not the same engine.
Well, of course they're not.
One's a single cam, one's a twin cam.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Fair enough. But it's still, let's take two inline 6. Well, your car was literally called a 66. Your Daimler 66 made less power than the fucking, it was no faster than the 6-cylinder was, which was no faster than a pedestrian. And the pedestrian would leak less.
it was very good. It depends how hard you hit them. It was very good at going 140 kilometers an hour down the highway.
Yeah. So what 80s car can't do 85 miles an hour?
I don't know. It just felt really. It felt very stable.
Fabulous.
Yes, fabulous.
It was very fabulous. Okay. So we have next up after F50 is Enzo,
Yes,
which I've not driven.
I have not either.
But you've driven, I've driven an MC20.
12.
MC12, sorry. MC20 is a new one. Have you driven an MC12?
No.
Okay. That did not light my hair on fire. And so,
What were the characteristics? I mean, so how, in terms of sort of functional usability, right? If you're filming with this car, like what did you...
we filmed on it at 5:00 in the morning in the dark, and it was just, we just kind of went out, and the experience was very nerve wracking because the car is the size of my house. You can't see anything behind you. The mirrors I remember the mirrors not being great. It's an automated manual that just,
You kind of wrestle with it a little.
you scream at it, you punch the steering wheel, and you apologize to it because it's someone else's $1 million car. It did not deliver. If you're going to look like that, and I'm personally not a fan of the way the MC12 looks. It's just awkward, I think, and just looks like a race car. And here we are again. You don't want a race car for the road. It did not have a lot of grip, and this one had new tires on it. It just did not have a lot of mechanical grip. The engine did not sound amazing. It was not all that quick. And I think the overall was, to me, it's not worth the compromises of what's baked into that car. Now, I don't know how much different an Enzo would be, but they're the same tub and the same engine. So, I mean, effectively the same car. I'd be really curious to see what you say after driving an Enzo, if maybe that F50 was the high point. So F50 over F40?
That's tough. A lot of people ask that question, and I struggle with that. I mean, it's really hard to argue with the 12-cylinder naturally aspirated engine. The F40, when you drive it, this is maybe not that useful to most people, but when you are interacting with it at low speeds, it feels very much like a 308 in terms of the gear change and the steering and all of that, and the weight, the forces of the steering. And so it feels familiar if you spend a lot of time in 308s. And the F50 feels a little bit more singular. There's not a lot that it reminds me of. The F40 really reminded me of a bunch of other Ferraris. The F50 in most respects did not. And I liked the power delivery and the noise. I mean, it's no secret that I don't really like flat plane V8s. So from a driving perspective, I think that I probably prefer the F50 to the F40. I was really impressed by how the one thing I did not like about the F50 is that the front overhang is long and the nose is low, and there's just certain situations where you drive over something and you're like waiting for the noise of the nose, the
noise of your bank account going to negative $4.5 million.
Exactly. But overall, I found it quite a pleasurable car, and I'm curious to see whether you like it, because you might absolutely hate it for all I know.
I doubt it. I mean, are we not aligned on all things Ferrari?
We usually are.
I bought your 308.
Yeah, we are usually aligned. That's true. But yeah, so it is a car that exists to me at exactly the right Goldilocks spot in terms of supercars. It is neither like a Countach where it is so physically demanding, or that Koenig C62 race car. Whatever, choose whatever sort of unpleasant vintage supercar experience. It's neither that, nor is it so fast and outrageous that you can't play with it and exercise it to some extent. The car can be exercised in a street environment.
Which is funny to say about anything that can do 0 to 60 in 3.8 seconds,
yeah.
Right? Because most of that stuff...
But that's GT3 Touring now. The numbers of the car are not far off of a GT3 Touring.
But you can exercise a GT3 Touring, and I think the reason why is that it's long gears, but it's got power everywhere.
And the torque was like a big thing that they were like, let's move the torque down low.
Mm-hmm.
Which this car does not do.
Does not do. So that forces you. I like being able to drive matted, flat out at 2,000 RPM and just listening to that ignition intake noise that you hear. The sugar crash is real.
Oh yeah. Are you ready for bed now?
Yeah. I mean, I think I had like 2. What are in these that's it things? I mean, they say it's just fruit, but how many grams of sugar?
Well, they've probably compacted an entire.
So this
bag of
this
fruit
little
into
bar,
a little bar,
which is the size of a half the size of a matchbox, has apples and mangoes in this fruit bar, but it's enough sugar to kill 6 diabetics.
So now you're crashing.
Yep. I think so. I've also not driven LaFerrari.
Neither have I, but I'm not interested.
I'm not interested at all.
I mean,
I think
physically because I know that the car is going to be so fast that on the road I will just be frustrated. And I didn't feel frustrated by driving this car on the road. The size, it feels much smaller than it is. Like I was really expecting the car to feel large and unwieldy, the way that you often describe as relates to the MC12. Right? The car is physically awkward and large and difficult to operate in a built environment. Mm-hmm. And this car immediately shrunk around me. I immediately felt comfortable in it, and like it feels more compact than a Testarossa. Not a high bar, but a Testarossa can be managed on the street, and an F50 is even easier to manage. I mean, it felt like the car feels closer to, choose mid-engine manual steering car of choice. Is that Lotus Elise? Maybe it feels closer to Lotus Elise than it does to Testarossa.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, Lotus, again, a car that I can put my hand over and...
In terms of like just the way that the tactility and the responses and the sort of, part of it is anytime you have something with a carbon tub, there's a certain character to the noises that come through the chassis, and sort of there's a... How do you describe? I think you know what I'm talking about. How do you describe this? There's a little bit of like hollow and like a sort of, you hear occasional sort of knocking noises and...
cracking noises.
Yeah, it's not like the opposite of feeling carpeted or insulated. Mm-hmm. It's and I don't find it objectionable, but it has that same sort of character, mm-hmm. And I think Elises have that too, even though they're not carbon tubs.
Yeah, but you're hearing an Elise, you're hearing it's a separate body and frame, and you're hearing the fiberglass body smack against the aluminum frame, and it's just in that car, it's not a great noise.
Yeah,
it's just
it's more subtle than that. Okay. But so in that sense, the character was kind of similar to where you just hear
F40 that way? Because that car's got no sound, no carpeting, no nothing, right?
Yeah, it's like that to some extent also. I mean, they both have composite tubs. So to me, I think it's Goldilocks. Having not experienced all of them, my working hypothesis, which I would like to test out, is that it might be the Goldilocks supercar.
Interesting. So let's talk about modern stuff. Have you driven Ford Pista?
Yes.
And?
It's stupidly fast.
I
And the steering's kind of, to me, it's too light, and it's too, it never seemed like it was going to weight up.
It doesn't weight up. That is the first time I came back from a drive and said to the engineers, too much. And they were not happy with me for saying that. But I'm like, you have now crossed the line. This is way too much. All the Ferraris are always too much, right? That's the whole idea. That's part of being a supercar. But now it got to the point where it really took away the amount of thrust that thing has in any gear at any speed is always more than you want, more than is enjoyable, and more than the chassis can handle. And that's not a dig on the chassis. It's a compliment to the engine.
Yeah.
Where they do this unbelievable turbo boost strategy where every gear allows progressively more boost and at different curves. And
right.
so that
they're
you're
artificially creating drama.
Right.
Is what you're doing.
But you floor it in third gear and it like lights up the rear tires. Barely. I mean, it's struggling for traction. And then you do the same in fifth gear. And so now you're at the, 3,000 RPM instead of 5. And it's just, and does the same thing. And then you do the thing in seventh gear and you watch the boost gauge. Is it seventh speed? Yeah. Watch the boost gauge peg and it does the same thing again. So it's encouraging you to try to rev the engine out, but actually it's not. You can ride this wave of torque. And I literally did sneeze and got it sideways. And like, that's something I've joked about for years, but I was in the car with an engineer and the road was dry and the tires were warm and everything was fine. And I'm in like a 30 zone in some little tiny town and I sneezed and the throttle pedal on that car doesn't have a lot of weighting to it. And it just moved just enough. And I was probably at 4,000 RPM, just kind of getting ready to blast out of town. And the back end twitched and I had a stability intervention. I'm like, this car's going to kill somebody who's going to yawn. I was like, and then, it just is too much. And I thought for the first time, it's not the first time, 458 was fast enough. 488 gave too much. It became an order of magnitude faster when they put turbos.
And you can interact with the 458 more and use more of it.
Right.
Because, it doesn't have all that torque down low.
Right. I think you should have to really work for it. So the V12 cars you still have to work for, and I really hope Ferrari doesn't put turbos on their V12s. If anything, throw a hybrid system in there to help at low end and one that you can switch off. Only so that you can pass Euro stupid CO2 regs. I mean, the joke is a Ferrari V12 the average Ferrari V12 is probably driven a number of kilometers in the hundreds a year, right? These cars don't go far, so they're not polluting. Therefore, let them emit more grams per kilometer. So, European targets are expressing grams per kilometer of CO2. Well, if they only go 3 kilometers, it doesn't matter how many fucking grams they are. They're going to emit far less than, some diesel VW Lupo that gets driven 50,000 kilometers a year.
Yes.
And I really don't want emissions regs to push these cars out of existence and force them to downsize turbos. And with that said, I'm hopefully about to experience a Ferrari 296, which is a 6-cylinder. I love watching all the spy videos where there's a V12 coming in the Roma, and there's videos of a V12 Roma, and you listen to it. It's, no, that's a V6. Like, it just sounds really, really good. But it's no question, no doubt about it, a turbocharged V6 in that car. And so that might be amazing, but the V8 I don't think did better for turbos.
Yeah.
And the V12 that engine is magnificent, but also now too much. You really can't drive an 812 in anger.
Yeah,
on the road.
I agree. I mean, it's just outrageous. You're just constantly lighting up the tires. The F12 TDF's like that too. It's like alarming.
It's fun.
It is fun.
It's fun.
It's scary.
But at least that thing has the acoustic drama because you're always at revs. When you're lighting anything up, you're at high revs. Mm-hmm. And so at least you have, the whole thing is a cohesive package where the turbo cars, you're at 2,000 RPM and you're lighting them up.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So favorite 2-pedal Ferrari is the F12.
For you or for me?
Both?
For both of us.
Like we agreed. Favorite fuel injected Ferrari event?
Oh, I never asked that. I don't think it can be a V8. I don't like any
What about
of the
360 CS?
360 CS, I loved Challenge Stradale. I loved until I drove F430. And once I drove F430, I no longer loved 360 Challenge Stradale, but it was really power and the transmission more than anything else, because the transmission got way better. 360 manual.
They have this issue where they don't calibrate the throttle response and the gear change and it's just none of it. It's all a bunch of stuff fighting with each other.
My favorite fuel injected Ferrari of all time is that Stratos.
Yeah,
that Stratos, which is an F430 manual cut down.
Yeah.
And Ferrari will be very upset with me. I would say 288 GTO is definitely up there. I mean, if I had the money, if I had any close to that kind of money, I would do whatever it took to get a 288 GTO. That was magic. Otherwise, my favorite Ferrari to drive is still 308 GT4.
Yeah.
Sorry to say.
Yeah.
Carburetors for the win.
There's others out there that you should try, but I'm not sure that. Well, I would love to get you in a 246. But
that's high on my list. I'd love that.
Yeah. The old vintage, the V12 cars are all probably a little too unwieldy, or like the 330 you drove. That's a very representative vintage Ferrari independent rear suspension. It's 12-cylinder.
There's everything about that car was surprisingly supple to me.
Yes.
It's a pain in the ass because the turning radius is the size of New Jersey.
Yeah.
Other than that,
and are you talking about from like the top to the bottom, or are you talking about the crossways?
No, the turning radius.
I know.
Top to the
bottom? Top of the bottom of New Jersey, or the crossways of New Jersey?
Both combined. It's the square of the surface area. No, they're huge. I mean, they're very difficult to drive in very confined spaces because of that. But otherwise, light clutch, great shifter, beautiful engine. Doesn't sound like a V12. I mean, the other crazy thing is that the noises that we associate with modern V12s.
That's funny.
Didn't exist.
To me, that is the noise of a V12, because that's like a lot of my formative early V12 experiences were with that engine, that Colombo V12. But to me, that is the V12 noise.
That is the real V12 noise. But what I think everyone else is accustomed to is exhaust-tuned V12 noises like Aventador. Aventador is one of the worst sounding exotic engines I've ever heard in my life in the car. Outside is the best sounding 12-cylinder I've ever heard. But that is a very engineered in thing that V12s back in the day didn't sound like that.
Yeah.
At all. They're gritty straight six is what they kind of sounded like. So yeah, give me a Datsun 240Z sounds better. A hot Datsun 240Z sounds better than a Colombo V12. With, anyway,
but then if you get that motor uncorked, that Colombo engine uncorked is wild.
So it's a Colombo that's in a 250 Testarossa?
Yes.
Yeah. Holy shit.
Yes.
Holy shit.
Uncorked.
Yeah. But at that point you're talking, now $20 million.
I mean, you could
do that.
Do that to your car. You could make a replica. A lot of people do that.
You can make a replica by putting
out of a 2+2.
Right. Which are still not in it.
Yeah, no, those are like closer to $1 million than to 500. But it's not 20 million or 50 million.
Okay, well, on the bright side.
That's the Ferrari conversation. Okay, this has been a discussion of Ferrari automobiles, specifically their spicier offerings.
The F40, the F50, the Enzo, the LaFerrari, and 288 GTO, and F12. We talked about everything.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't talk.
We didn't talk about the Mondial.
It's a 348.
Or any of the 2+2s.
It's a 328 or 348.
Yeah.
That was the same shit. Won't you join us next week? We're here every week-ish. Derek eats every 4 minutes, so here.
Thank you.
Have something.
Great. We can end this episode so I can eat more.
Okay, great. Bye.
Bye.